From the Mercy One studio.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and the Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.
Welcome, folks, to the Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
And we are coming to you from these United States of America here in Des Moines, Iowa, where we both do things at the Mercy College of Health Sciences, where I am the Senior Advisor for Mission Initiatives and the Director for the new Center for Human Flourishing. Bud, what do you do over there yonder at Mercy College?
I'm the Academic Dean there at the college.
And we are underwritten by Mercy College. Thank you for underwriting our show. We're glad to be broadcasting to you all, Iowa Catholic Radio. And it's another glorious Wednesday, because what Wednesday, Bud, is not glorious?
Well, and it's a nice time of year. You've got to really soak in these days, because after this we get to the really humid, torrid stuff. So growing up in the Midwest, I know, appreciate late April, early May.
That's right. You have to count your blessings one by one when it comes to the weather. No, but I know that this past weekend, people out and about, children getting to have fun. First sunburns for some of the kids, so, that's always an annual rite of passage.
I know. It's too bad. In my household this morning, we were applying aloe vera because we do think about sunblock a lot. My children have inherited some fairly pale skin, so it's important to have that in tow during the summer. But this time of year, like when you're in that sort of spring mode, sometimes you leave the house and don't think about it so much.
That's right. We have the same issue with we did put sunscreen on, but evidently didn't apply it evenly, so that makes you wonder if they're going to start, how for a while doing CPR was just something if you wanted to, and then everyone's like, no, everybody should get CPR training. Like at some point it's going to be sunscreen application training.
Yeah, it can make a big difference. I've found out on a vacation once that failure to apply sunscreen in certain moments can lead to detrimental experiences.
I know people were not expecting this in the morning, but if you've ever sunburnt your eyes, which I have, it's very awful.
Like the eyelids?
No, eyeballs.
I didn't know that was possible.
Yeah, it was horrible. Now, funny enough, it was the dead of winter. We were in the mountains, and so snow. But yeah, I had to wear patches over my eyes. So my point, that you're like, why are they talking about this? Folks, a little safety announcement from the Uncommon Good. Wear sunscreen, wear a hat, wear some sunglasses.
Well, yeah.
We've done our part.
We're underwritten by Mercy College of Health Sciences, and if you do end up accidentally sunscreened, the graduates of the college will very much be able to help you out, because they've been trained to be skilled medical professionals and handle those sorts of cases. But they'll also be compassionate, I believe, and not judgmental in the face of your lack of prudence and failure.
That's true. They might be. That's a good point. They might be. They might be compassionate to everyone else. I think if we walked in with just blistered skin, they might give us a little razzmatazz, and we probably would deserve it.
Specifically, former students that we had in class.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, you're probably right. Well, and the summer term is just getting underway next week, but we've got our sound effects like the eagle screech. We need a choo-choo train for this time of year. Summer term, chugga, 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 woo, woo.
I mean, if you would have told me, we probably could have made that one.
All aboard.
All aboard the summer train. MCHS.edu, correct?
Yeah, MCHS.edu. I was wise, apparently, not to go into marketing and to go into education instead.
Well, I mean, we all can't be marketing majors. I mean, we were just talking the other day. People were like, "Oh, right," because we have new folks at the station. So I think they were asking about the genesis of the eagle screech, and we pointed out that at one point we were trying out other animals, but the eagle screech was just demanded.
Yeah, that's one of the more legendary facets of the Uncommon Good history, and we took on the eagle screech, and then at some point, someone in my life, I've blamed my mother. Sorry, Mom, if that's apocryphal. Said I don't know about the eagle screech. The way with the topics you covered and stuff, does this work? And so with that seed planted in my head, I thought to myself, well, maybe let's try out some different animals. I think we probably led with some of the wrong animals. Like at one point it was a cat's meow.
Yeah, and a pig.
Were properly phased out. Maybe if we had done a lion's roar from the beginning.
Right, something just very regal. That's a good point. But you know what? If you're talking about demands from the people, we go back to underwritten by Mercy College of Health Sciences, mchs.edu. Many of our programs very much in demand, and you can summer start with many of them.
Yeah.
Different modalities. You can be in person. You can be online. You can get done with our advanced BSN. What is it now at this point? How many months?
The ABSN, it takes you about a year's time.
Yeah, so you can be a nurse with a year from now, and people responding to the call during the ramifications of everything that have happened this past year. So mchs.edu, thank you, Mercy College, for underwriting our show. But one thing before we go to the break, I know this is sort of advertising a bit more for stuff going on with Iowa Catholic Radio, but I'm thinking of the fact that because it's starting to be nice outside and soon will be hot, people are trying to get us to golf more for the sake of for charity, and that might not be the most charitable thing in the end to get you and I golfing.
Yeah, this golf outing sounds really fun, but it's kind of living rent-free in my head because I'm trying to decide the best way to navigate this. I want to kind of not back out of the event, but of making an embarrassment of myself on the course and have some sort of responsibility, like delivering water bottles to John Leonetti or driving a golf cart if they're available.
Yeah, like they're going to be really suspicious if we both end up with like broken arms at the same time, like we made a mutual pact or something.
Yeah, we better coordinate our stories from the beginning. But I do hope if I'm forced to play that it can be best ball, because otherwise I'll be lost in the woods and everyone else will be having fun.
Well, best ball is the salvation of many people, I'm supposing. With handicaps that would make grandmas cry. Well, on that note, folks, you want to make sure to stick around because what we are best at, not golf, but yapping, and we're going to be doing that. This is the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We will not be talking about golf. We'll be talking about faith in the public life, and we will be back right after this. Folks, if you want to make sure to contact Iowa Catholic Radio or the Uncommon Good as much as you would like, you can do so through the Zip Whip line. 515-223-1150, 515-223-1150, hashtag UCG for the Uncommon Good, the Zip Whip line. Your way to make sure and be a part of what's going on at the studio, at the station, all of our events, and at Iowa Catholic Radio. But is there anything on the Zip Whip line that we need to make sure that people feel like they can let us keep us up to date on? Maybe sunburn stuff.
We like substantive comments on the Zip Whip line, but we also invite feedback on some of the more frivolous topics that we addressed in the beginning of the show, such as sunblock, golfing, animal sounds.
That might be it. Like if you have any other, health variety advice you want to hear from people who don't really know, the Zip Whip line, 515-223-1150. This is the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr on Iowa Catholic Radio. We'll be back right after this.
The Iowa Catholic Men's Conference is Saturday, May 22nd at the Embassy Suites downtown, starting with Mass at 7 a.m. Speakers include Gary Dolphin and Tim Jameson, hosted by Joe Stopulos and John Leonetti. Learn more at iowacatholicradio.com/events.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and John Leonetti in the morning provided by Bell Construction.
Bell Construction is a roofing company. They specialize in residential re-roofs like commercial jobs. Bell Construction, 515-963-4494. Bell Construction.
There are millions of children that go hungry every day. Thank you to Skeffington's Formalware for supporting Mary's Meals. Their vision is that every child in the world should be able to receive at least one good meal every day in a place of education. MarysMealsUSA.org.
Thanks to Blessman International for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. Every year, Blessman International leads teams of Central Iowans to share the compassionate heart of Christ with orphans and vulnerable children in South Africa. You can learn more and sign up for a trip at blessmaninternational.org.
Thank you, Ashworth Vision Clinic, for underwriting Dowling Catholic Sports 365 on Iowa Catholic Radio. Ashworth Vision Clinic online at ashworthvision.com. Ashworth Vision Clinic, 515-440-4610.
Thank you, Golden Rule Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling, for sponsoring my show. John Lee and Eddie in the morning on Iowa Catholic Radio. Golden Rule, servicing Des Moines for over 15 years. They obey the rules to live by, especially the Golden Rule. Online at goldenrulephc.com.
Thank you, Dental Associates, for supporting Dowling Catholic Sports 365. Dental Associates, addressing your smile, needs, and dreams. 515-225-6742. Online at Des Moines-DentalAssociates.com.
Thank you, Big Red Q Quick Print, for underwriting the sports report. Family owned and operated since 1980, Big Red Q Quick Print is a full-service print shop, ready to help you with all your printing needs with speed and accuracy. BigRedQ-DesMoines.com.
We're back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the show, and thank you for supporting Iowa Catholic Radio. So, Bud, today we're going to talk about participation in public life, which you'd go, okay, isn't that what you guys talk about every time? And really it is, but of course when you have sort of a subtext that is part and parcel of everything you do, it benefits sometimes to take a step back and speak specifically to the idea of participation in the public life, because if we're talking about the common good and how Catholics participate in it, it is immediately in some ways going to come down to how we participate when we enter into the public sphere and the public realm. Now, public-private, I would maybe say, Bud, is a topic that we have to eventually flesh out here. It's not necessarily something that has a deep history in Catholic social teaching. I would even say that if you go back and look at the ancient medieval world, they might not even use those terms. But I think that that's something we should work towards. What we can start with is to say, let's talk about very immediate ways in which we understand that we participate in public life as Catholics. But avoiding one, the easy one's politics. Everybody seems to go like, oh, right, when Catholics get involved in the public life, it must mean politics. But of course, that's occasional. We don't vote all the time, and most of us aren't public representatives. But, let's just start where we work, Bud. When we work at a college that's Catholic, we are at least related in some way to a health system that's Catholic. I think even not only being employees there or even being students there, but even being patients or being people who are students, people who are involved in that sort of arena, get at the root of some of the things we want to talk about today.
Yeah, we were joking about the eagle screech at the beginning of the show, but it's kind of a fitting sound for us to use because a lot of the topics we address on this show, Bo, deal with our relation to our country and sort of we live in a society, there's no way around that. How do we seek the common good of the place where God has placed us while remaining faithful to what our Lord taught us? And I think historically, Bo, Catholics maybe had an easier path of staying faithful in America. And what I mean by that is we most of us know from American history that throughout the 19th century into really the early 20th century, there was in the popular culture a widespread sort of prejudice against Catholics in the sense that to be fully Catholic in the mind of some Americans was to not be fully American. And so Catholics, I mean, I'm painting with very broad strokes with this history now, but we talk about Catholic ghettos. So in large urban centers in the United States, there were communities where 90-something% of the people who lived there were Catholic. And within that space, Bo, people sort of knew what was required of them, and they felt it was kind of natural to follow it because all of your neighbors did. They supported you in that endeavor. In places where there were tensions between your Catholic convictions and being an American, say, should we read the King James Bible at school? Should we pray certain prayers before the start of the day? Catholics created sort of enclaves to live that out and to not be harassed, so to speak. Over the course of the 20th century, again, painting with broad strokes, Catholics sort of entered more broadly into American culture. There were two things that really brought this about, I think. One is Catholics joining various war efforts. And so if they were like sacrificing their lives on the battlefield, many Americans thought like, oh, well, I thought this about Catholics, but they clearly love the country and are willing to sacrifice a great deal for it. And then in some ways, Catholics, the majority became more successful. So whereas, Irish and Italian immigrants, other communities, when they first came to the United States, they had to really strive to make it in the world's terms. In the latter half of the 20th century, more and more Catholics became educated with like higher education degrees. They started to enter prominent fields. We now have a lot of Catholic politicians and members of the Supreme Court, etc. And that raised new challenges. And like you said, Bo, you kind of hinted at this. We see this most prominently maybe when Catholics, over the past year, you've got the case of like Amy Coney Barrett, who's a prominent Catholic who was nominated to the Supreme Court. And of course, our current president is a baptized Catholic. And when we see those cases, those are the ones where it feels to me, Bo, like in debates around the water cooler, it's more clear in people's minds, like President Biden or Amy Coney Barrett shouldn't be doing this, that, or the other. But as we're trying to say, it bears on all of us, because really to step outside of your house is to enter into the thorny mess of saying, like, how do I maintain my Catholic commitments in the face of all these challenging dilemmas that I face on a day-to-day basis?
No, and I think that it's important to, like, as we talk about the history of this, that's a good way to start this out. Because on one hand, it explains the very seemingly different impulses that have been governing Catholic participation in public life into the 21st century that we're in now. We're both saying this as converts, so there's, of course, a way in which we're being academic about this fact of history that many of you either lived through yourself or saw in the life of someone that you were related to. So there's a way in which, I'll just be honest, I will never have a sort of firsthand knowledge of this that cradle Catholics do. But suffice it to say that even if you go do the reading and are honest about it in any sort of way, there is the impulse, clearly in the 60s. I mean, you can throw out, like you said, broad brushstrokes or easy examples like John F. Kennedy, where Catholics were like, okay, we're not going to be in the ghetto anymore. And there was a navigation about what that meant. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have to cast aspersions on the whole endeavor. And I don't think it like necessarily is our place to go back and sort of bifurcate what was good or bad. But suffice it to say, in charity, people wanted to be a part of public life in a grand way. And this was sort of not just Catholics. There's all sorts of people who were doing this. Of course, the civil rights movement, beyond just a matter of justice, was a social movement that saw how is it that we can all be more in an integrated fashion, part of public life, and not, like you said, just sort of separated into a million ghettos. This is where this idea of a melting pot comes in. It's not like George Washington's talking about a melting pot in founding documents, but that people saw this as a potential strength. Well, part of that is because of philosophical undercurrents that went into the foundation of the United States. Part of the idea of a melting pot is, well, you take some things and you leave some things. So if you're going to be a part of the melting pot, there's stuff you have to leave behind. And this gets into this idea of like the public square, social contract theory, Rawls, all these different sort of liberal Enlightenment philosophers, not like Democrat, Republican, but the idea behind it, and what it meant to be part of a public life together. So there had to be some sort of shared identity and things like this. Well, in the Catholic world, that meant that for part of what this impulse meant is there was a way in which you could privatize your faith. This gets back to the public-private divide. There's a way in which you can privatize what you, believe at home and what you yourself would say, but in public life you have to sort of take off your Catholic hat, I think is what people thought. Now, what's funny is a sort of a response to this, and for good reasons, right? People pointed out, no, you are fully Catholic. You can't be part-time Catholic. You can't be half Catholic. You're either Catholic or you're not. So part of what happens is people respond to this and they go, no, I'm going to be fully Catholic. But that also is a sort of hard conception to imagine as well, Bud. And I think a lot of people filter that through what they're used to. And so to be fully Catholic almost became like a consumerist identity, right? So we would, I'll start purchasing my Catholic identity. So I'll listen to Catholic radio stations like us. I'll watch Catholic TV shows. I'll wear Catholic things. I'll do Catholic things. And the impulse over against acting like you can be half Catholic or part-time Catholic is absolutely good impulse. But it also misreads, I think, the traditional understanding of the public and private divide. So there starts to be this idea that the only way that I can publicly be something is almost like the choices I make, and that the choices I make have the Catholic adjective in front of it, so it as it were. But what we're trying to advocate is to say, whatever it is when you are fully Catholic and then enter into public life, I'm not trying to say that it's unconscious or anything like this, but it certainly is something different than saying, oh, well, you make Baptist purchases and you make Muslim purchases, you make Hindu decisions and you make atheist decisions. If we're fully Catholic, then even doing something like driving on the road somehow becomes infused with our Catholicism. But there's not like a Catholic way to drive. Does that make sense? But I mean, that's part of what I think we're driving at here.
Yeah, and it may have sounded to listeners like I was dodging your original question. You were bringing up how we face this at the college, and then our college, of course, is connected to a medical center. I wasn't trying to duck and weave. I had to get a little bit out of the way, but this does come up in class with students. And, Bo, I don't know if this might be freeing for some students and challenging to others, but we kind of joke in our philosophy classes that we want to be like a fly in a good way, like a horsefly who's kind of, like posing repeatedly the questions about important matters in life. And one that we would always press in bioethics is, so occasionally when we first bring up this topic, they're sort of like, I mean, it is something that you do wrestle with. And so there's maybe a temptation to opt out. And what we tried to point out in class is there's not really a neutral standpoint when we get into these conversations.
Right.
The secular world would like to make you think otherwise. Sometimes, so I want to say this carefully, but, for instance, when we go back to whether or not certain religious orders would provide contraception as part of their insurance plans, and there were famously nuns who said, in conscience, we can't do that. And I know friends who are not connected to the church who, when they see that, they feel like Catholics are just resorting to sort of like a religious space, meaning there are these kind of unique, interesting things that we do in our faith, and we want sort of a religious exemption. I mean, this gets far more complicated, but they think of it sort of akin to like kosher dietary laws.
Right.
Like the Jewish community has these certain laws about what they can and can't eat, and
specifically in their mind legislated for them.
For them,
yes.
Yeah. And so Catholics kind of want to opt out. Well, if you're going to practice something like medicine, if you're going to run a hospital, there's just no way of avoiding these moral questions. And no matter what Sam Harris, this prominent atheist, tells you, you can't solve them using, I'm going to put it in scare quotes, science. He wants to pretend like there's kind of an equation, or we can apply just like concepts that we derive from the scientific method and solve these problems. No, I mean, they involve philosophical convictions, and that's not to their detriment. These are questions that human communities for centuries have wrestled with. How do we serve the common good? How do we uphold human dignity? And it's not like Mercy One, near downtown, has this kind of like religious way of going about it, and then this other hospital over here, they're operating with this clear-headed secular rationality. We have to be upfront about the fact that there's sort of like a conflict or a competition here. And as Catholics, I want to start the conversation by saying we shouldn't apologize about what our tradition brings to the table, because we've been at the forefront of really high-quality, compassionate medical care that we should be proud about.
So when it comes to kosher as Jewish people themselves understand it, so this is not a Catholic commentary. The distinction is Jewish people think that God gave them a specific law about how they are to, about their diet, about how they're supposed to eat. And so even within their religion, the idea is that they have, I don't know if exemption is even the right word, but suffice it to say, within their understanding of their religion, there is a way they are supposed to eat, them alone, that doesn't necessarily pertain to the Gentiles. So when they ask for a religious exemption, as it were, for dietary or whatever, this is sort of relatively easy, I think, for the secular world to handle, because it's just a matter of like, okay, well, you can have these exemptions. There's even a way in which, a while back in the NCAA tournament, BYU asked not to play on a Sunday. You can even imagine that, right? Because still there, the idea is like, we specifically as this group of people believe we can't do X, Y, or Z. The problem is that people assume all religious objections, let me back up, all objections made by religious people are similar to kosher. So that when we talk about what we think about contraception, for instance, as Catholics, they think we're making like we believe there's kosher sex, and that only it applies to us, and that it's different for anyone else. But actually, no. I remember very tellingly one time in one of the ethics classes we were taking, Bud, at a Christian school, as someone goes, something to the effect they were asking about Christian ethics, and our ethics teacher said, well, there really is no such thing, because Christians are making it a observation about how humans should act and what's the best good for humans. It's not even, so to speak, ceremonial laws that are involved in this regard. Like, we can understand that you don't believe you should be baptized, or that you don't believe the Eucharist is what we say it is. But when it comes to saying what a human is, we believe we're arguing. We're willing to get into the public sphere and argue about what it means to be human and what's best to be a human. The idea that contraception is like bad because we believe what we do about Jesus Christ in terms of the Trinity is misunderstanding what we're saying. Like, we are making a philosophical argument that stems from what we believe about human anthropology, but we believe it pertains to everyone. So when we have something like a hospital where we're offering what we believe we're compelled to do by our religion, right? That's what happens with Christians. We believe we are to be hospitable and provide healing for people. And so when we offer that, we're not asking people to become Catholic in order to be patients there. However, it's the case that we are not going to operate that hospital in any other way except as Catholics. And that doesn't mean anybody has to follow our ceremonial laws, or if we have dietary laws, right? But we don't act like people can't, we don't force people to eat fish on Fridays if they come to our hospitals. However, when it comes to our understanding of what human beings are and what they do and what's best for them, we can't but follow the philosophical implications of that anthropology. And that's why I think sometimes, but it's hard for people to understand, like you said, contraception mandates. There's a lot of others, but just to throw that one out, they misunderstand it because I think they think of it as akin to like kosher dietary laws.
Yeah, you gestured to how we fast on Fridays, and that's probably a pretty good analogy because this really is a discipline that pertains to Catholics. And like you said, it'd be kind of awesome, but we've never tried to impose it on the rest of the world. I feel like a lot of people sort of maybe unwittingly end up embracing, like my Protestant parents love fish fries, but there's probably, yeah. But there is, so even in that case, there is kind of a principle involved where we do think fasting is an important practice, and that it would be, like we've talked on the show in the past about how adoration to God is something that we all owe in justice, but we recognize that there's a shape to that specifically binds Catholics and that we all sort of agree to by participating in the faith. When it gets to some of these other matters, and I'm going to stick with medicine, so this even comes up in a question like abortion. And sometimes, Bo, what further clouds the picture for folks is that there can be a truth that's revealed in special revelation, and that also can be known through natural reason.
Right.
So you think about the prohibition against abortion, like thou shalt not kill. I know some Christians will quote like, you formed me in my mother's womb. There are parts of God's written word that have shown us, like this is a wrong thing to do. But as Catholics, we also firmly believe that in a case like that, like that sort of wrong could be understood by any person of goodwill. And the fact that some people miss out on that truth isn't because it's something that, so to speak, fell from heaven, but because their reason is clouded in some sense. And I think as Catholics, that puts a little bit of onus on us as we talk about some of these matters. We have to prudentially understand the situation. And I mean, not to pick on any one person, because I know like being a leader in the United States today can be a tough thing, but sometimes I feel like, and I'm probably guilty of this as well, when we face these conflicts, we want to fall back on religious liberty. And that is a part of our American tradition.
Right.
And in some cases, it has even safeguarded the ability for Catholics to like practice their faith coherently. But we do want to make the case that, I think we should be outspoken about the fact that these truths, they do in our minds bear on all people, and be ready to give a sound argument in that regard.
No, and I think that to the point about abortion, it's completely possible to say I'm against abortion and not be Catholic. But to go, I believe that the Pope is the Holy Roman Pontiff and the Vicar of Christ, and binds in obedience those when he who listen to his declarations. That makes you. I mean, I don't understand how you could be like, well, I'm not Catholic, but I believe that the Pope is the Holy Father. Who, right? Like, so there's obviously things that to believe makes you that. I think that this is what we're going to talk about when we get back from the break. All good things lining up to really suss this out. And I think we'll get into more properly the idea about public and private, where that comes from. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this. Folks, if you want to be a part of what's going on with Iowa Catholic Radio, you just need to make sure to check in and see what we're up to, and it is easy to do. Just go to our social media. The first place you can go is the original website, iowacatholicradio.com, where you can listen live, donate, sign up for newsletters, do all of that fun stuff. You can go to Facebook and become our friends, and then you can see all of our posts and all the other wonderful things we do on Facebook. You can go to Twitter, follow our tweets at IA Catholic Radio, and then you will be tweetified with our observations. And then finally, you can download the Iowa Catholic Radio app, and anywhere that there is data, even one single datum, you can listen live, you can listen to the music channels, you can donate, and again, all at the convenience of your phone. So, this is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. Right after these messages, we will be back.
The Iowa Catholic Men's Conference is Saturday, May 22nd at the Embassy Suites downtown, starting with Mass at 7 a.m. Speakers include Gary Dolphin and Tim Jameson, hosted by Joe Stopulos and John Leonetti. Learn more at iowacatholicradio.com/events.
There are millions of children that go hungry every day. Thank you to Skeffington's Formalware for supporting Mary's Meals. Their vision is that every child in the world should be able to receive at least one good meal every day in a place of education. MarysMealsUSA.org.
Thanks to Blessman International for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. Every year, Blessman International leads teams of Central Iowans to share the compassionate heart of Christ with orphans and vulnerable children in South Africa. You can learn more and sign up for a trip at blessmaninternational.org.
Thank you, Ashworth Vision Clinic, for underwriting Dowling Catholic Sports 365 on Iowa Catholic Radio. Ashworth Vision Clinic online at ashworthvision.com. Ashworth Vision Clinic, 515-440-4610.
Thank you, Dental Associates, for supporting Dowling Catholic Sports 365. Dental Associates, addressing your smile, needs, and dreams. 515-225-6742. Online at DesMoines-DentalAssociates.com.
Thank you, Big Red Q Quick Print, for underwriting the sports report. Family owned and operated since 1980, Big Red Q Quick Print is a full-service print shop ready to help you with all your printing needs with speed and accuracy. BigRedQ-DesMoines.com.
Here's your forecast on Iowa Catholic Radio. A few clouds coming in this afternoon ahead of a cold front. Our temperature will be pretty comfortable with upper 60s. Overnight, a shower or two with that front moving through the area. We'll be in the low to mid 40s. And then tomorrow, a few morning clouds, but turning sunny in the afternoon. Low 60s on our high temperature and a little bit gusty. Sunshine on Friday, warming up a little bit to the upper 60s and breezy. I'm meteorologist Steve Hamilton on Iowa Catholic Radio.
Back to The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the show and supporting Iowa Catholic Radio. So, Bud, we've been talking about Catholic participation in the public life. And so I think we brought up some very thorny and hairy issues about why maybe people are uncomfortable about talking about this in the first place, but necessary distinctions to be made. But maybe the primary distinction is precisely the difference between public and private. That is a lot of P sounds. I forgive everyone if it sounds like I'm exploding through the radio here. But yes, private and public distinction. On one hand, Bud, not a terribly old distinction to be made. Definitely you go to the ancient and medieval world, and I would almost venture out to say that they would be surprised or kind of confused about what you might mean by that. But even its pedigree in the modern world gets to be a bit shaky. I'll put you on the spot. Yeah. Your area of expertise is, of course, in 19th century historical theology, precisely John Henry Newman. I would have to think that that's where we maybe start to really get that being wrestled with in the faith. I know that there's philosophical precedent, maybe a few years, the last century before that, etc., where people started asking this idea is like, what's a public citizen? What's a private sort of interest? But I'd say in the faith life, the 19th century really only starts to pick up on that, and I think it's fair to say that doesn't have a uniform idea about exactly what that means, which probably complicates us talking about it in the here and now.
Yeah, these are very complex questions, and it's never been easy. You know, Catholics from the first generation have always wrestled with how do I go about my life in a way that's faithful to my Lord and King. But I would say, Bo, the picture was a little bit narrower, or I think in every generation it's been challenging to take Jesus at his word. I know that's a simplistic way of putting it, but when you had a society like Christendom, and I'm just using Christendom as like a sort of cipher for saying like pre-Reformation Europe, the questions were a little bit simpler because for the most part, everyone within that society, and especially those who had political influence, etc., they were at least trying to answer the questions based on the Catholic tradition and what had been passed down. There was still two swords, but there was an idea that even political rulers were bound to listen to the voice of the church. After the Protestant Reformation and what's called like the wars of religion, you started to have societies that were built on different foundations. And one of these foundations was this assumption that there was public and private sphere, and that the governing authorities shouldn't intrude on people's like private convictions or religious practice, but that there was this kind of neutral space where everyone could participate in terms of like paying taxes, fighting wars. I mean, there was perceived to be this common ground, and as long as you didn't impose your religious convictions in that space, you were okay. Obviously, that's a story. That's a tale, a narrative. And in our time, we're starting to see, especially, that things are complicated. And I thought about this, Bo, the other week because I came across a political cartoon in my Facebook feed, and in the part in baptism where the person being baptized has to say, or their sponsors, that I renounce Satan and all his pomps. There was an image of a politician saying that. It says, I renounce Satan privately, but not politically or publicly. And I guess in our conversation, we're trying to say from the very get-go that that's a convenient answer, but it's not faithful to what we've been given. And I'm going to pass the mic, but this goes all the way back to, I think that option was sort of what Pilate tried, like, I'll wash my hands of this. And, other, like later on, even those who were followers of Jesus said I could pinch this incense to the Roman gods, but like internally not think that. And the church rightfully has always said, like, no, there's no space in the world where you can, so to speak, turn off a switch and set your Catholic convictions aside.
Well, in many ways, it's just a very deep philosophical question about where would the private realm and the stop and the public one start. And in some ways, a lot of the battles we're having about, anything goes to disagreement. Like, there's this sort of assumption that we believe there's a private and a public sphere, but then everybody's very confused about where they would put the line. So you see this with social media, where there's groups of people who go like, well, social media is private, right? Because it's just my ideas. And you go, oh, private? That thing's, publicized everywhere. But they're like, well, but I'm not like a journalist. I didn't write an editorial, okay, so we get into those. Okay, well, all right, so social media is not private. What about what you say in your home? And you're like, well, now if someone heard you say something or they think you did, a lot of this stuff about like cancel culture or holding people accountable, the reason that we don't have a good way to get a handle on it is because we have incommensurate ideas about what public and private is. And that's probably because, like you said, public and private, truthfully, is a story we tell to make common life work. That it's part and parcel of the secular world And I don't even mean that derogatorily. I mean the modern secular world and its understanding, right, that there's some sort of neutral space. But, of course, it's only neutral because someone declared it as such, which means it's not truly all that neutral, right? It is a decided space. And that, of course, people will go like, wow, the goalposts are shifting. But that's sort of the idea, right, is that we shift this space to say you can say these things here but not those things. You know, don't yell fire in a crowded theater seems to be like this really basic conviction that everybody throws out. But then past that, people have gone all over the place about what counts as public or private speech. And I would guess that my argument, which is quite a thing to say on a radio show and then not back up completely because we don't have enough time, is I just don't think Catholics should be overwhelmingly interested in trying to defend that narration of things, which is not to say that we need to blab about our most intimate thoughts. There's no way of that at all. But, of course, there's a way in which in some of the most important things in my life, which would be, I would guess, the most intimate, I can't help but make that apparent. When I go to Mass, right, or when I let people know that I've gone to Mass or that I've been baptized or that I celebrate Easter, what thought of my understanding of myself but is more intimate than that? But, like, I, so to speak, wear that everywhere when I'm being a Catholic. You know, I don't think you need to sort of, like, we don't need to, like, turn around and go back to the old practice of publicly saying all of our sins necessarily. But this idea that we have a vested interest in getting involved in the public-private wars, I think that, to me, is what I'm throwing out, but is that maybe it's not worth the effort that we sometimes think it is, because we're imagining what it means to be a Catholic in the common life of a place incorrectly.
Yeah, we can put flesh on the bones by thinking about case studies. I think, Bo, the difficult question for a lot of Catholics, if they've been listening to this episode and they're like tracking mostly and supporting what we've said thus far, is, well, what do I do when the charge to take care of my family runs into some of my Catholic convictions? And so the really thorny questions is, I went into medicine so that I could heal and so that I could care for others. And now I'm in a place where the society at large is moving in a direction where it feels like they're going to ask me to do things that I'm just not capable of doing. And that's where we've mentioned this virtue on the show before, but the question of prudence and the importance of having a spiritual director and asking God for wisdom. And I mean, honestly, Bo, sometimes I think we want to pretend let me say it another way. If you're out there, you might say, like, well, that's a problem for maybe if you're Catholic and you've got like liberal leanings or something, but it faces all of us. And if we want to move beyond like the medical field and think about politics, so we're all aware of politicians who have kind of used this phrase like, well, I believe this personally, but I just can't impose it on the country or whatever. But it happens in both directions. So, we think, I mentioned earlier on the show last year, Amy Coney Barrett was nominated to the Supreme Court. And, like the Holy Father and the bishops have asked us, given the circumstances in society today, not to support the death penalty publicly. And, of course, for someone on the Supreme Court, they're almost inevitably going to face cases where they have to address this question. So how do they navigate that? And we probably don't have the time on the remainder of the show to answer that question for Mrs. Coney Barrett this morning. But I know she's actually written on this topic, and when the question came up for her, she said she's of the conviction, based on her own, working through of the question, that Catholic judges should not actually do the sentencing when the death penalty is involved. Like, they should recuse themselves in those cases. She does make a distinction in that same article to say, like, as an appellate judge, it's a little bit of a different situation. And what she's saying in that regard, Bo, is that like when it reaches that level, what's being asked is, like, are the protocols of the law being followed leading up to the sentencing? I'm probably not enough of a legal expert to say whether she's right or wrong on that question, but I think it's I appreciate the fact that she's wrestled with it, that she hasn't opted out for the public-private divide, but I'm sure that she's had nights where she stayed awake asking, how do I uphold my Catholic faith in this vocation that God's called me to.
No, and I think that she's a good example that hopefully all of us start to realize. If you go, well, what's the point of this episode? Then, guys, and the idea is just to discomfit us with the world. We're in the world, but not of the world. And there's no good answer to say except you will, in your life, if we're doing this correctly, come up multiple times to situations where there's just no easy answer. And I know that this sounds like I'm defending the profession I was been trained in, but this is why there has to be Catholic ethicists. I know that sounds like, Catholic ethicist is just sort of like a brainiac, ivory tower, person just yapping on about things that, like, if you just, follow the Bible or just read the catechism, you'd be good to go. But actually, there is a lot in this life where things get difficult, and this is why part and parcel of participating in quote-unquote public life or the life of the commonwealth, the common good, will inevitably run up into things like cooperation with evil, and whether it's proximate or remote. And the reason that I know this is the case is because Paul, through a lot of his letters, had to get into this idea of how do we follow what we've been told to do when it seems to immediately work against us. So the obvious one is paying taxes to a Roman government that is actively persecuting you. And I think it's telling that Paul, in a letter written when he is held under false pretenses, essentially, right? He is unjustly imprisoned by the Romans, tells people to pay taxes to the Romans because it is right to provide for the common good. And you do that by doing your part and paying your taxes, knowing full well that the Romans not only will use it incorrectly, but we're currently using those funds to persecute Paul himself. So a lot of this gets down to, Bud, is to be honest about the fact of the inescapability in the vale of tears from participating in evil in some way. People hear this and freak out and think what you're saying is you're making excuses for doing the wrong thing. But it gets back into just very basic things that I know we've talked about in several episodes now. But, Jesus walked on those roads that were almost always made by either the Romans or by, Herod, by people who did awful things, right? And why did those people want to make those roads? Well, they wanted to, half the time get their military out to go do some unjust war faster, right? Or they wanted to sell things they shouldn't, et cetera, et cetera. But, of course, the idea is it is good to provide for the public provision, things like the infrastructure of roads, et cetera, et cetera. So this very elemental thing that comes up in the New Testament multiple times, render unto Caesar what is Caesar and to God what's God's, it's not a matter of trying to get out or make excuses for things. It's to admit that if we're in the middle of a sinful world trying to save it, what we can't do is be dualist or Manichaean about it. We can't be Gnostic about it. We can't act like the goal of the Christian is to have nothing to do with anything that's even sort of touches on sin. Because Jesus Christ himself was pure, never sinned, God himself, and he came and ate among sinners, right? He came for us, he died for us, he healed us, he walked among us. So we must too walk among sinners and the sinful, because we ourselves are those people as well, on the pilgrim path, asking for forgiveness, trying to make our way. But as that's the case, it comes down to it, right, is we need people like well-trained, in the tradition, ethicists to try to help us think through these situations that we don't know exactly what to do with. There has not been a situation like what Amy Comey... I mean, let me back up. There's been situations that are like what Barrett has gone through, but there's not been this one, right? Mm-hmm. There's not been people who... there's been situations similar to what all of us have to do with vaccines or taxes or all of these things that are presenting to us in 2021, but they've never been exactly like this. If we don't believe the church has the sort of intellectual reasons, the intellectual prowess, the intellectual vocation to speak to these practical issues, then, it's like you said, then we really are leaving people to be hung out to dry when it comes to these difficult questions.
Well, Bowen, I take comfort from the fact that there have been saints as part of our community who have shown great courage in the face of very difficult circumstances, and God grant us the courage to be faithful if the time comes where, our own well-being or, ability to provide for our families comes under threat. It's interesting how those great saints went about it, though. And I know I apologize to the listeners if it sounds like I'm a broken record. I mean, St. Thomas More is a shining example of this sort of thing, where the Henry VIII had declared himself to be the head of the church in England, and Thomas More knew this to be a lie. And what he did, though, and I mean, I don't know, I haven't checked every detail of the play A Man for All Seasons, but there's a scene in there where one of his children says, like, why don't you just swear the oath of allegiance to the king, and then you can do the good work that God's called you to do. You don't have to necessarily, like, believe it all the way down. And St. Thomas More, of course, thought it was important, like, the abuse of an office doesn't do away with the good of the office. And so his answer was not to check out the law. He knew that that would have more dire consequences over the long term than the alternative. And so he says, I'll rightfully respect the authority of the king insofar as he's been duly constituted by God, but I can't speak a lie. And there may be times, Bo, in the future at some point where Catholics have to say, look, we do, like, it's not about not, remaining, it's not about remaining pure and never coming into contact with evil or whatever, but this directive or this law, it's asking me to do something where I know it would be a sin to walk that path, and to deal with the consequences is a form of witness. I mean, an analogy that we can all probably recognize is when certain Americans have felt like they couldn't participate in specific wars because, like you said, it was maybe a flagrantly unjust war, and their conscientious objection wasn't undermining the fact that there are times in life where we have to protect the innocent, but it was saying, in this case, that's not what's happening. So in conscience, I can't walk that path. And I think when they did so, they, so to speak, upheld the inviolability of conscience and the importance of remaining faithful to God, regardless of sort of the costs that are involved.
No, that also, I mean, I think that's great. What that also reminds me of with Thomas More is why he took so long to finally state what he actually believed about the king. If you remember, people go, okay, well, if you're not going to just say it, give it lip service, right, because you can't speak a lie, why not, like, defiantly go against the king immediately? And there was that whole interesting scene where he goes, if you got rid of all the laws, it would just be you and the devil, right? And how would you ever escape him? So Thomas More, as long as he could, tried to not press the issue. Mm-hmm. So, it's funny, like, half of the people go, why don't you just, basically, why don't you be a coward and say you believe it when you don't? And then the other people were like, why are you a coward, and not immediately yell out? But the idea, right, of course, is as long as there was a path for him to not befoul the church or the king, he wouldn't do it. And he only did it when the king pressed him to choose sides. And then, famously, as the play says, I die a good servant of the king, but God's first. And I think that that's what we have to say in this life. We figure out how to do that, is we want to be good servants, much more important than public and private. We want to be good servants to the people that we've been called and obligated to serve, to be given the vocation and the blessing to serve. But we are always God's servant first, and all other things stem from that. And I think if we keep that in mind, all the other difficulties aside for what we've said in today's show, that's a lifetime worth to dwell on, but also just in daily life, a prayer to be asked. How do I serve God first? And then from that, serve everyone else. This is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, our families, our city, our state, nation, world, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week. But if folks want to be a part of the prayer life here on Iowa Catholic Radio, what's an easy way for them to do so?
You can pray the Rosary daily with us on air. We broadcast it at 5:30 a.m., 9:30 a.m., and 9:30 p.m. Those Rosary opportunities, or the opportunity to pray the Rosary, is available 24/7, 365 on the Iowa Catholic Radio app. We also broadcast the Angelus in the morning at 6 a.m. and then pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet each afternoon at 3.
Also, folks, coming up soon with Iowa Catholic Radio, if you want to be a part of all that we're up to, on May 22nd, on Saturday, Iowa Catholic Men's Conference, 7 a.m. to noon. It starts with Mass at 7 a.m. Gary Dolphin and Tim Jameson join Joe Stopulos and John Leonetti for the Iowa Catholic Men's Conference. You can register online at iowacatholicradio.com. And then finally, like we were talking about earlier, Wednesday, June 23rd, the Iowa Catholic Radio Golf Classic begins at 10 a.m. at Legacy Parkway in Norwalk, Iowa. Iowa Catholic Radio Classic, golf, build community, have fun. And as we said, Iowa Catholic Radio has more on both for you to be able to check out and register and decide, how bad you're going to beat Bud and I's group, whatever group we get put into. Folks, this is a ministry. It's much more than just the people that you hear on air. Even the good people behind the boards and the people in the office, yes, they're part too, but you yourself are part of what's going on here at Iowa Catholic Radio, a ministry to spread the word of Jesus Christ to all the people who need it in a timely manner, 24/7 on the airwaves, reaching out to people in need. You, of course, aid us by praying. You can pray along as Bud threw out there just a few minutes ago in your private prayers, rosaries, whatever you can do on behalf for us to the Lord. Your volunteer time, but also, of course, materially. When you donate, you support our ability to do this. You can donate by calling 515-223-1150. You can donate online at iowacatholicradio.com. And if you have the Iowa Catholic Radio app, there is a donate button there as well. We want to say thank you to everyone who prays, everybody who volunteers, and everybody who donates. You are a part of this ministry, and you make it work, and we can't thank you enough for doing all these things. Well, Bud, I'm not guessing that you're going to go out and practice golf too much. I think at this point we've committed to being the bad golfers, and what's coming up.
Well, the nice thing about golf is you can play very poorly, but the risk of injury is minimal. I mean, you don't want to try to swing the club too hard, but it's like if you play at our age pickup basketball or pickup soccer, it can get dicey. You can sort of slough it on the golf course. That's true. It's only a crying shame that video game prowess at golf doesn't transfer, because maybe I know you would be better at it, but even there, I probably would not be very good at all. God bless, folks. It's The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and The Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.